I'll be working on a few different projects in this video. Stick around until the end to see all of them completed. Welcome back to Insomniac Woodcraft. My name is Ethan, and the farther along into these projects I got, I decided this was turning into a woodworking meets 3D printing kind of video. I'm starting by cutting down some Afromosia and walnut and gluing them up to create a symmetrical panel that I will use later to make a desktop organizer tray. While that glue dries, I'm going to get started on the second project. This is going to turn into a lamp. I bought an amber light bulb that I think will look really nice with the walnut once this is finished. I'll be cutting this walnut into narrow strips and then chopping those down to about 6-inch long pieces. My idea for this lamp is to make it look like the old Lincoln log towers I'd built at my grandparents' house as a kid. I wasn't an engineering prodigy, so it's a pretty simple design. I 3D printed a template for drilling out all of these pieces. I ended up going through 3 of these templates before I was finished, but that's to be expected when using plastic. I thought about skipping through a lot of this footage, but if I did that, you wouldn't get the full tedious experience, so I left a lot of it in. After a lot of drilling, I used my DIY disc sander that I built in a previous video to get all 35 of the pieces, plus a few spares, sanded up to 220 grit. After a while, I needed a break from all these pieces. Getting back to the tray, I ran the panel through the planer and then marked the layout with the 3D printed template. I then cut down the panel to the approximate size, fixed the template using tape and some clamps, and started using a pattern bit to route the pattern. I wasn't sure how well the 3D printed template would hold up, but it seemed to work just fine. I think you could run into some problems if the router bit got too warm, as that would start to melt the template, but I didn't have that problem here at all. I didn't have a router tray bit when I did this, so I started with a straight template bit and then switched to a round nose bit to round off the corners. That's why there are a bunch of small lines on the surface, but they sanded out pretty easily. I used a flush trim bit to clean up the outer edges and then went back to the lamp build. I went ahead and applied finish to the pieces, but in the end I don't think it saved me any time. More on that later. This was my first time using the tried and true original wood finish. I'm pretty happy with how it looks, and the matte finish works well for a lamp like this. At this point, I had decided this was a 3D printing video, so I printed this little platform to help keep the lamp square as I got started, but my cuts and drilling weren't precise enough for it to be perfectly square. As you can see, I used 1/4-inch dowels in each corner to assemble the Lincoln log lamp. I made sure to keep the finish out of the holes I had drilled, so I add glue every few layers so the pieces will be held securely to the dowels. Every 4 or 5 layers, I clamped everything down before the glue had time to set. This seemed to work pretty well, and it kept the layers nice and tight where they overlap at the corners. At one point, I broke one of the dowels, so I drilled it out, cut a new piece, and continued assembling. At the end, I couldn't tell which corner had the broken dowel, so it seemed to hold together just fine. I debated how to finish the top. I thought about leaving it wide open, which would make it easy to replace the bulb, but I thought it would look nicer if I covered the top and made the lamp accessible through the bottom. You may have noticed my drill guide had 5 holes, and now you can see the reason for that. Once the top was assembled, I clamped it down one last time and let it get some rest overnight before I woke it up with some sanding. I knew I would need to sand the corners to get them nice and even, but because I already added finish, I had to clean the dust out of all the corners. I ended up adding finish to the entire thing a second time. Live and learn. Back to the router tray for just a second. I added a chamfer around the bottom and did a bunch of hand sanding, which I spared you from watching. The base for this lamp is pretty simple. I marked out where the top would sit and drilled a few holes. Then transferred the base onto the rest of the lamp and drilled just deep enough to mark where I'd be adding threaded inserts. I added the threaded inserts and did a test fit with the machine screws that hold everything together. It's finally time to mount the lamp hardware. I carefully marked out the center of the base and made sure I had the lamp oriented so the cable would come out through a gap at the base of the lamp. Except I did something wrong and had the lamp mounted 90 degrees off. So I had to redo that part. Before I get to the reveal, I had an idea to use 3D printing a little more directly as part of the project, not just an accessory or tool. I'm going to breeze through this one pretty quickly. The lamp hardware I bought came in a pack of 2, and I had this swarmy ambrosia maple, and I thought the striping in it would look nice as a base for a second lamp. I 3D printed a circle cutting jig for my router, and took a couple passes with a straight bit, then finished cutting out the circle on the bandsaw. I repeated this for a second smaller circle, and then cleaned up the edges with a flush trim bit. Then I glued the 2 pieces together like a wedding cake and used the hollow chisel mortiser in 3 places around the edges. I know I'm not explaining much here, but it will make sense when you see the finished product. My idea here was to 3D print a lampshade. I played around with a couple different designs and then printed one with a fuzzy skin setting, which adds just a little bit of texture to the outer walls. It completely hides the layer lines that you often see on something that's been 3D printed, and at first glance, you'd probably assume this was some kind of fabric. Anyway, here are the results of each of these projects. I also 3D printed a tray, just for comparison. Jigs and accessories are a common application of 3D printing for woodworkers, but I'm genuinely surprised at how well the 3D printed lampshade turned out. Let me know what you think. Does 3D printing have a place in woodworking? And if I hadn't told you, would you have known that was a 3D printed lampshade?